Karl, thank you so much for joining us today on The Climb.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here. Glad to share.
No, man, it's good to have you. So what I want to do is I want to go over your climb real quick. This is essentially your career and how you got here. And feel free to jump in or stop me if anything this isn't accurate. All right. So you started your first business, which was an agency while you were in high school, went to William and Mary where you got a business degree. Then you became a research analyst for an investment company. And then after leaving there, you became a business consultant at HBR for a couple of years where you helped tourism businesses and nonprofits use smart marketing to increase profits. Then went to work for an agency, Cole March, as the director of operations. You were there for a little over a year. And then you went to work for Hesketh.com, which is one of the oldest web development agencies in the world.
Yes.
And then after leaving that position, there you were the operations manager there. You started your current consultancy, Sakas and Company, where now you've worked with over 400 agencies. You're now a sought-after agency consultant, business coach, and speaker. And one other thing I might add, you've also found the time to start some networking groups, one being HubSpot, which grew to I believe over 250,000 people. And you've published 2 books, and I believe you're about to publish your 3rd.
I need to finish writing it, but that'll be next. Yep.
Okay. Was there anything that I missed or glossed over that our audience should know about your climb?
Let's see. The transition from Hesketh.com to what's now Sakas and Company, I actually recruited my then boss as my first client.
Oh, that is, wow, very smooth.
It was a nice transition. Yeah.
That is a great, I couldn't think of a better transition.
Yeah.
As long as it's a good boss, of course. All right. So today we're going to talk about how you can, or how agency owners, work less and earn more, right? And this applies to essentially anybody that owns an agency that, wants those things, right? So despite, whatever their size or goals, everybody can benefit from this, especially our audience. So I think that is a great place to start with. How can I work less and make more money?
Well, it's definitely something to aspire to. And of course, keep in mind that it's relative, right? If you're currently working 100 hours a week, maybe you want to get to 80. If you're at 80, maybe it's get to 60, get to 50 to 40, what have you. Some of the agency owners I work with out of 400 firms just about all over the world, for some, they're currently working 40 or 45, they want to go to 20. So keep in mind that work less is relative to your unique values, goals, and resources. There are always some opportunities to optimize. And of course, earning more is also relative. For one client who is paying himself about $50,000 a year, his goal was to get to 100,000. You may be making 100,000 now and you want to get to 150 or 200. We're working with a client now where the 2 partners are paying themselves 150,000 a year. Their goal is to get to 300,000 while also cutting their hours from 45 down to about 25 hours a week. So keep in mind that, the challenge of getting there is going to depend on where you are now and where you want to go. But indeed, it's ultimately about working less and earning more. Now, in my work with hundreds of agencies on every inhabited continent, there are certain regional differences, but ultimately there's certain themes you can look at around where your agency is now and where you want to go. And that helps you identify where to focus next to help you work less and earn more. And I've identified, in fact, 4 stages. And if you understand which stage you're in today, that'll help you make the next choices. So here are the 4 stages. And I'll also share, as people are listening along, which stage are you in now and where do you want to go? I'll share some tips to help you make that leap. So if you think about your day-to-day involvement, when you first started your agency or you first joined your agency, you were probably doing a bit of everything. You were working with clients, you were doing sales, you were doing the deliverables for clients, you were, doing operations, there is everything. Hopefully over time though, that shifts. So, in the early days, it might be stage 1, which I call mandatory. When you are mandatory on a day-to-day basis, you are, well, just that. As you build your team, you can't get away for lunch without something blowing up by the time you got back. You're probably the day-to-day contact for all of your clients, or almost all of them. And you're certainly working long hours, and you're not getting paid enough for what you're worth. And a way to know that you're in mandatory, I mean, you probably will feel it. If it seems like you can't get out of the office for more than a day at a time, you're probably mandatory. The idea of doing a full week of vacation or even longer, yeah, if that's impossible, you're probably mandatory. Now, eventually you can move up to necessary. When you're necessary, it's still not great, but your team is helping out. They're handling some things for you. Sometimes they're even making good decisions as they're handling things. You can probably get away from the office for a few days, or away from Slack and IMs and everything else. But you're still pretty hands-on. You can't leave for an uninterrupted week-long vacation. It's better than mandatory. Maybe you aren't always the client contact, but you're often getting sucked in to solve client problems and firefighting along the way. Good news, there is hope. You can go from stage 2, from necessary, you can become needed, but not necessary. Now, needed but not necessary is a phrase that I got from investor Mark Cuban. You might know him from the show Shark Tank, or from owning the Dallas Mavericks, or other activities. Mark Cuban has said that in his investing, he wants to be needed but not necessary. That is to say, his money is needed by the firm he's investing in, but he is not necessary to their day-to-day survival. I've applied that to managing and running an agency. When you make yourself needed but not necessary, you're not going to disappear for a year at a time, but your team can make day-to-day decisions without you. You've become needed but not necessary. How do you know you're needed, not necessary, that you're in stage 3? Well, I mean, a few things. You can actually go on vacation for a week or two and not get interrupted. That's pretty exciting, right? Your team is making good decisions. Sometimes things escalate to you, but it's not a day-to-day thing. And ultimately, you're feeling confident about your agency's future. Now, for many agency owners, they choose to stop here in stage 3 once they've become needed. And there's nothing wrong with staying in stage 3. But some agency owners and leaders want to go beyond that, and that's stage 4, which I call optional. When you make yourself optional as an agency owner or leader, you are just that. You can step away from the business for a bit. You could take a month-long sabbatical if you want. You could do vacation in that in that neighborhood, and things are going to go fine. Like you're going to come back and things have probably gone smoothly. You're not going to disappear for a full year, but things are going to get done. And that's if you choose to. By the way, it helps to keep in mind where you want to go in your agency. I think of it as a continuum, the agency growth style continuum. You've got lifestyle on one end and you've got equity on the other. And most people are somewhere in the middle. But if you lean toward lifestyle, your goal is to get a great income, a relatively unstressful role as an agency owner. That's more on the lifestyle side. You're still growing, maybe not growing, you're not going to necessarily double every year. That interferes with your lifestyle experience. But, things are a lot better. Now, you could also be on the equity side. Your goal is to grow your agency to sell, to build equity and then have an exit. If your goal is to build an equity agency, you definitely need to become optional, because the more optional you are, the more likely you are to get a good offer or offers. But you can be optional as a lifestyle agency owner as well. So here's the thing, for people who are listening, which stage are you in now? Are you in stage 1, 2, 3, or 4? And as you think about where you are now, whether you're mandatory, necessary, needed, or optional, what is the stage you want to be in? In my work, people usually are not in the stage they want to be in. Sometimes they're mandatory or necessary, maybe they're needed and they want to go to optional. Or, sometimes people will be in a few categories at once. For instance, maybe they are, needed or optional when it comes to client delivery, but they are mandatory or necessary when it comes to sales, things like that. So you can be in multiple spots at once. But, John, I can share how people can move up each of the stages. But before I do that, any questions about the concept in general?
Yeah. this is a different format, I'm digging it. So the needed and not necessary. I like how you take you took that from Mark Cuban. I think that's smart. But you mentioned there's other agency owners that are in different stages, or potentially some of the stages, at the same time.
Yes.
But how do you identify how do you identify where they're at? Is it just by the vacation? Are there other signals that you use as well? I mean, that would be a question.
Vacation is
Um,
a good proxy. You can use that. So if we think about, if you're mandatory, the idea of vacation is inconceivable. If you are necessary, you might go on a few days or a week-long vacation, but it is not, it's going to be interrupted. It's not
mhm.
uninterrupted time. The good news is when you become needed but not necessary, you actually can take an uninterrupted vacation, but maybe it's a week, right? I did a 3-week vacation to Australia, New Zealand, and Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, and it helped that I had set things up to make that happen. Um, I was in the midst of onboarding a new team member as I was doing that. I don't recommend doing a 3-week vacation while also onboarding a key team member. But so in that case, that wasn't totally unplugged. But hey, I was in Australia. It was nice.
Yeah.
So you could use that, and for instance, I have a client who does an annual 1-month sabbatical each fall. Not this year due to COVID, of course, but you could use that as a proxy. I would also look at how involved are you in your work with your clients. So for instance, if you are the only contact for your clients, you're probably mandatory. If you're at
Okay.
the point where you're starting to transition clients over to others on your team, you're probably making the shift to necessary and then maybe needed. Maybe you're at a point where you're the key contact for your biggest clients, but you've shifted smaller clients to other people. In that case, you're probably somewhere between necessary and needed. And also, just how does it feel? If you are stressed out every day, you are certainly not optional. And you're probably not needed. You're probably necessary or maybe mandatory. So, there are nuances for sure. But
Mhm.
does that help give an idea of some of the combinations?
It does, and then I want to dig into questions based on some of the the psychology behind it.
Mhm.
But and based on the way that we've teed this up, I know we're given the context.
Yeah.
All right. So, what is the major solution that you have to this problem in a broad sense?
There's actually a very specific place to look to move up each step. So we can
Yep.
take a look at that, and I can elaborate on
Yep.
those. So, imagine a chart looking at your quality of life. So each stage you move up, your quality of life is improving as an
Mhm.
agency owner. Initially when you're mandatory, the quality of life is pretty low. It's not great. When you go from mandatory to necessary, things get better. I mean, they're not perfect, but ultimately it's an improvement. And then you can get to needed. Things are dramatically better, and if you want, you can become optional, and then quality of life is pretty amazing, and you're also getting paid pretty well, right? Because you've built the structure to make that happen. So how do you move up each step? Well, there's a particular place to focus for each of the jumps. So for people who are listening, if you're currently mandatory, the way to get to necessary is to focus on a concept I call swim lanes. Basically, that's who's in charge of what at your agency. What are people in charge of? What are they not in charge of? How do you make sure that you aren't doubling up your efforts, and also ensuring that you don't have a situation where everyone else thought someone else was going to get it and no one did? The idea is that once you define swim lanes, people can make more decisions on their own rather than having to suck you in every single time. If you want to go from necessary to needed, it's about a concept I call values, goals, and resources, or VGR. The idea there is that you're helping your team understand what are the values when they make decisions, what are the values to follow. Those could be agency level values, those could be values for you as an agency owner. They could also be values in terms of how your clients choose to operate, and each client is going to have different values. When you know the values, you can make better decisions without having to ask every single time. Goals are where you want to go at an agency level. This could also be individual team related goals. It could also be, a focus on clients' goals. The more you understand about your clients' personal and professional goals, the better decision you can make on their behalf without having to, ask every single time. And then resources are, what are the time, budgets, people, tools available to help get things done? Because, for instance, maybe you've got a solution in mind, but it's going to cost $1 million and you don't have $1 million for it. What's the smaller solution? What is available? And then finally, as we're thinking about, moving up, if you're currently needed and you want to become optional, that's about hiring and coaching. You're not going to make the leap from needed to optional without hiring the right people, with a skeptical hiring process and structured to make sure you're finding the behaviors you want, and also, coaching people. You can't just magically assume that everyone's going to get it. There's a coaching process, even for your best employees, to help navigate making that happen. So, from that idea, what questions do you have?
So, I mean, how does one go about understanding that they're the problem? I mean, really admitting it. Is it just having the different categories? I mean, let me put this in a different way. How do you
Yes.
prove to someone that they're the problem?
Well, I mean, I occasionally get inquiries from employees at agencies saying, my boss could use your help.
Right.
They're struggling with this, they're struggling with that. And the sad thing is that usually what the agency employees reach out about is something I could help their boss fix. But my question becomes, does your boss think it's a problem?
Right. That's what I'm talking. I know so many people that think that they're the exception to whatever logic
Yes.
is out there.
Well, here are a couple examples. So I did a presentation for an agency network a few years ago, right? So pulling people together, and the organizer had asked me to do a talk related to time management for agency owners. And one of my core points was, you need someone to help you stay on track. Whether that's an external person, whether it's a coach, whether it's your accountant, whether it's your therapist, someone to be like, hey, last month you said you were going to do such and such. How did that go? Or it could also be someone internally. Like, you don't have to pay someone externally to do it. I'm that person for my executive coaching clients, but your operations manager, your executive assistant, one of your project managers could be that person to help you stay on track. But here's the catch. I shared that concept, and one of the agency owners in the audience did not like that idea of having someone hold her accountable. In fact, she said something like, I don't want one of my employees like telling me what to do. Like, I'm the boss. I tell them what to do. Oh boy, that was, it was. I must have triggered a nerve.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, I wasn't saying that one of your employees or key contractors is your boss. They're asking you how things are going. And her defensiveness just about the concept of someone asking how something went, oh, I never would have worked with her as a client, even if she had asked. But she seemed to see the idea of accountability as this negative thing, as this really bad thing, right? Accountability is at its sort of basic point, you have to be accountable to yourself. If you're a business owner, I'll mention this to my coaching clients, we'll set strategic goals every month that are designed to move them toward their long-term target, whether it's doing an exit, whether it's more lifestyle oriented, whatever the case may be. But they're ultimately responsible for completing their own goals, whether I remind them or not about a specific goal. But if someone's opposed to the idea of accountability at all, it's going to make it harder to get things done. I worked with a client several years ago where, she was like, I don't have anyone to help. She eventually hired someone as a project manager to help her. But she really didn't like having someone, checking in on her. One of the coaching goals we had was around publishing a blog post. If you're listening and you've been paralyzed about the idea of writing a blog post, and you're just still not doing it, like, there's something else going on. It's not just a technical solution of pick a topic your audience cares about, outline it, write about it. If you keep getting stuck, there's something else going on. It's more of a psychology solution rather than a technical, here's how to write it solution, which indeed, going back to your original question of if someone doesn't want to admit they have a problem, we're not going to persuade them that they have a problem, right? They have to decide for themselves. That's why, although some of my clients call me their agency therapist, I clarify I'm not an actual therapist. I recommend that you work with a therapist. And you don't have to, but this year marks on and off 20 years of going to therapy for me. It's great. And I think we need to talk about that more. There's often a stigma about therapy. Um, you know, you don't necessarily need to have a mental health condition to benefit from working with a therapist. It's nice just to have a sounding board, someone who can listen, someone who's trained to ask the right follow-up questions. So, if someone is thinking they're not the problem, we're not going to persuade them otherwise. But it is worth considering. There's that idea of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. If you are struggling to increase the results you're getting, you're probably going to change how you go about it. And I've seen that in my own work over the years, and have made changes. And you know what? I'm going to keep making changes and continuous improvements till I retire. One other example, and this is an example for an agency owner who was overwhelmed but wanted to change. So not the agency owner at the conference who didn't like her employee asking how things were going. So I worked with an agency owner, in fact, here in North Carolina, who had mentioned that he was getting interrupted all day long. I'm sure you hear that from other agency owners you speak with, right? If
Yeah, like I would make that complaint myself. Yeah.
There we go. Well, here's the exercise I did with him. So it's something that John, you might try, and for people who are listening, if you feel like you keep getting interrupted. So the agency owner, he had about 20 employees at the time. And he was like, I keep getting interrupted all day long. It's hard for me to focus. So it feels like I'm in meetings or I'm getting interrupted. That was his job. Now, if you're a manager, going to meetings is part of your job. That's the nature of reality. Add some buffers, this and that. But on the interruptions, I said, well, okay, I'm trying to get a sense of the nature of the interruption, who are the people interrupting you, and the timing of it. And so my assignment for him was to spend a week tracking the interruptions. And the goal was to get kind of a view into who are the people that are interrupting him. Is it the same people every time? Like, is one person doing 80% of the interruptions, or is it a mix? Are the questions that people are asking about, what's the nature of it? Are these questions that they should have been asking you? Or are these questions that they should have answered themselves? Or is it somewhere in the middle where maybe they should have answered it themselves, but they don't have enough info to make a decision? They don't know the values, goals, and resources. In that case, they can't read your mind. So as we think about improving your quality of life, if people don't know the swim lanes, don't know who's in charge of what, or don't feel empowered to make decisions in a particular area, they're going to ask you. If they don't know the values, goals, and resources to follow, they're going to try to make decisions, but they're kind of guessing. And then if you also haven't hired the right people and coached them on making better decisions, it's going to be harder to get that, kind of get better results. What did I find when I reviewed the results with him, the following week after he'd gathered the data? It turned out that it was his own fault that he kept getting interrupted. He did have the swim lanes down. People didn't have the values, goals, and resources, but he was also subverting himself. It turned out, and I did some follow-up conversations with his team, he would approve decisions and then he would override them later. Or he would say, oh, use your judgment. And then, so they would tell the client something based on what they understood to be the situation. And then he would overrule them later. And then the employees would have to go back to the client and be like, oh, I said that, actually, we can't do that. And so he was training his employees to not make decisions without consulting him, because if they made a decision without him, it was just going to make their life harder. Over the coming months, we worked through better defining swim lanes, better defining values, goals, and resources. improving his coaching skills. He was thinking people would just sort of magically get better. And ultimately, in his case, his goal was to do an exit. He secured an exit at a valuation he was happy with. And it proved to be a good culture fit too. He ended up staying longer than the earnout required, and has since moved on from there. But if you want to improve, you're going to have to change how you do things.
I like that. Now, what qualities do you see in most of the agency owners that are able to move to the optional category?
Well, self-awareness is important, right? If you're not self-aware, you're going to struggle to, to make the leap. Um, for instance, are there things that you notice your team mentions a lot as a joke, but it seems like it's a half joke? I would probably pay attention to that. It's also worth considering if you want to do a more expanded version, you can do a 360 review, right? That's where you get feedback from former bosses and peers and people who report to you, right? That they know what's up. They know your strengths and weaknesses. Give them an anonymized or anonymous opportunity to share them. So here's my experience doing a 360 review in 2012. So I was leading operations at an agency, and the owner of the agency was like, we have an opportunity to send you to a week-long leadership retreat program through Grinnell Leadership called Leadership Jumpstart. And I knew that it was pretty intense. Like, I didn't know all the details. I knew that we were going to be at a hotel out of town for a week. I knew that there would be at least a couple days where I would not be using my phone. Like, phone would be turned off for a couple days. We did have an emergency contact if someone needed to reach out, but it was like, really, let's focus. Beforehand, I requested 360 review feedback from, a couple dozen people that I'd worked with over the years, bosses, subordinates, peers, to get their anonymous feedback. And then I knew that the leadership retreat organizer would analyze all of that and put it into a report. And I didn't know what the report was going to say. I mean, it's kind of scary, right? You're asking everyone for feedback. It's anonymous. Who knows what people are going to share, right? Talk about being vulnerable. So I get to the retreat, and on the second day, they share the results. And I have to say, the results were pretty sobering for me to hear. The theme to the results was that ultimately, as a leader, I was good at getting things done, right? It was all about results. I was not good at making it fun for everyone around me. I was something of a taskmaster. I wasn't checking in on how people were doing in general. It was all about results. And you know what? I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My parents were both career Army officers. Growing up, it was all about getting results, right? So I was good at one aspect of my work, but not the people side of things. So good at getting it done, not at making it fun. And or as one of the other participants said, you can't be a leader if no one wants to follow you. Definitely sobering advice to hear. And I took it to heart. I was like, all right, I'm good at the results side. What can I do to cultivate the people side? And I found a book that a friend recommended called The Human Brand. And in the book by Chris Malone, who's a former Fortune 500 CMO, and Susan Fisk, who is a psychology professor at Princeton, they talk about how we're evaluated when you interact with people and companies on 2 dimensions, warmth and competence. And the idea is that you can be high, medium, or low on each of those. Ideally, you're high warmth and high competence. And in theory, you can be different combos. What I realized, this put words to what I was struggling with, trying to find a solution. I was high competence, right? There was no question about getting things done, but I was naturally low warmth, or at least that's how it was coming across to the people I was working with. And so ultimately, I was like, all right, competence, good. How can I raise that? So that includes even things like, asking how people were doing. Keeping track of, upcoming birthdays so I could send birthday cards. If someone, I might ask how they're doing and there's sort of a pause or a bit of a, whatever, I might ask if they wanted to share more. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But ultimately, being more present and focusing on where others are coming from. I also did improv comedy training, which is helpful in being present and being in the moment. Uh, Now, and if you're listening, by the way, and you're like, well, I'm actually, maybe you're more on the warmth side rather than the competence side. Like, everyone loves working with you, but you struggle to get results from people. Either way, check out the book, The Human Brand. I have an article on warmth and competence, kind of my agency application of that on the Sakas and Company website. But if what I'm sharing resonates and you're like, oh, maybe that's why things aren't working, give some additional attention to competence or to warmth, whichever one isn't going as smoothly. And I think you'll see some better results, and that certainly fits into the uh, the coaching side of things as you work with your team.
So how much of the personal development does somebody have to go through, right? So you mentioned one of the qualities is being awareness. Like,
Yes.
most people think they're hiring a business consultant
Mhm.
and it's all business, and then of course they have to be aware that they're the problem. So I guess the question would be, how much personal development does somebody have to go through to succeed in being optional?
I would say a lot. One of the challenges that I run into with agency owners is sometimes people will say effectively a version of "I want to be optional." I'll often see this come up when someone founded their agency and they're like, "I want to turn it over to one of my kids," and so the
Nepotism.
owner who what's that?
Nepotism.
Uh, well, and there is always a question of is the child competent? Often they are, right? Especially if they've grown up in the business, rather than suddenly kind of diving in. But if we think about kind of the hiring and coaching piece, uh, people will say if you're a 50 or 60 something agency owner who has kids who are in their 20s or 30s, and you're like, I want them to take over, people will say they want their child or children to take over, but they won't act like it. For instance, an agency owner said, I want my son to take over. He's been doing business development. The son did not seem very engaged in the process. He seemed totally happy to do biz dev, wasn't really interested in running the agency. In another case, an agency owner was like, "Yep, my daughter is working in the business. I want her to take over so I can do an exit by the time I'm 60, which was going to be in 2 years for him." But in our meetings, I found that he was talking over her, right? He was treating her like she was still a child, not a professional peer, and certainly not someone he trusted to take over the business. And she seemed competent, but he was basically applying his old way of thinking, which it's hard, right? Like it's a challenge. But he said he was ready. He wasn't acting like he was ready, and I've seen that with others as well. To the point that as a consultant, I tend to be naturally leery about situations like that. You're like, oh, you want your child to take over? Like, tell me more about that. Because I think oftentimes people say they want someone to take over, and this could be an external person too, but they don't want to let go. If you aren't willing to let go, even if you say you want to be optional, you're never going to actually make yourself optional, and you're going to drive everyone around you to distraction because you're not letting go. I mean, we saw that recently with the Richards Group, with Stan Richards, where he was still actively working in the business in his 80s. And, uh, ultimately, due to his actions, I mean, the agency, if it doesn't put them out of business, losing all of the major clients for his comments, it a lot of people have lost their jobs because he, it seems, didn't let go soon enough.
That wasn't a joke. Like, I read it in the New York Times and I'm like, how is that not a joke? Right? Like, how did he have data that said these are white supremacists that still stay at a Motel 6? I don't know. I just
I can't speak to that.
yeah.
But I
No,
I,
I
I
know, because
think
the Richards Group's done such great work and I've seen this thing and I'm like, how is that like, just, I don't even, it's hard for me to compute it, and I don't know him. I know people that have worked there, but
I mean, I guess it's a reminder of,
know your audience.
at, yes, related, if you're a performer, right? If you're an actor, actress, or a performer, or you're a sports star, the idea of going out when you're on the top, or going out on top rather than overstaying your welcome.
Mhm.
And indeed, if you're looking to do an exit, start that process 5 years before it's time for an exit. You can build your Dream 100 acquirer list, firms or types of firms that might acquire your agency, so you can start monitoring them, keep an eye on what's going on, maybe network to meet people there, things like that. Also keep in mind that the acquirer is probably looking at a 3-year rolling average of your annual earnings. So if your numbers are bad now, you're probably not going to get a good deal if you want to sell in the next year. So, the more you can plan ahead, the better. And you know what? If you don't want to sell, that's totally fine. Most people don't sell their agency. They focus more on the lifestyle side of things. If you're paying yourself enough to, build the lifestyle you want, to build some great retirement contributions and all that, you don't have to sell your agency. I built a calculator for my clients around, here's how to become a multimillionaire if you're not already, just through your compensation alone, not having to sell your agency. But it does require growing and running a profitable agency and paying yourself enough. It doesn't just magically happen. But if you start committing to working less and earning more, you can make that happen, whether you do an exit or not.
Now, what are the most, common problems you see in the way of somebody moving through each stage?
Mm. Well, a few things to keep in mind there. If you're currently mandatory, you're probably working really long hours and you don't have great margins. So if you don't have anyone helping you at all, it's hard to make that shift. Defining swim lanes. If you're the only person doing everything, right? I mean, all of the swim lanes are your swim lane. So that can be a challenge. Go ahead.
Oh, a small pool, maybe?
Yeah. I guess the kiddie pool or something like
Yeah.
that. So if there's no one else to help, you don't really have much you do in the swim lanes. So if you can't afford anyone, but this is something I'll do when I'm doing a bite-sized consulting call with someone who is in their early days of running their agency, and they're like, all right, who's the first person I should hire? Well, the answer on that is it depends, but usually there are 3 roles. And this is true even up to the 5 to 10 headcount mark. You're probably considering hiring a project manager or a salesperson or a subject matter expert, a highly billable person doing whatever your agency focuses on. Probably you should hire a subject matter expert if you're looking for that first person, or an early stage person and you're mandatory. Why? Because they can go out and bill over $200,000 a year in US dollars, and you're probably not paying them that. You're hopefully paying them less than half of that to get that, that level of billables. Now, as you grow, eventually you need more of a multiplier effect. That's where you want to bring in a project manager. You could also, they might have an account manager title, but their primary job is to coordinate things internally. In that case, you're paying a project manager, their billables are going to be lower, more like maybe 150,000 a year, could be a little bit less. So they're not as profitable personally, but they're now coordinating more billable people. So maybe, depending on the level of experience, you're paying the PM, between $60,000 and $80,000 a year. Let's say they're billing 140, 150,000 a year, but they are coordinating 5 additional subject matter experts who are themselves billing over 200,000 a year. So, that's a case where making an agency structure change is necessary to grow to the next level. That's a sticking point, right? If you're like, I can't afford hiring someone, well, you may have to take a leap to hire the first person. But if you're hiring a subject matter expert, they should be billing, over $200,000 a year. They should easily be profitable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you hire somebody that's hyper specialized on something, you should immediately be getting a return on that investment.
Correct, because you're paying for someone who is ultimately, an expert in that area. On the other hand, if you're hiring a salesperson, for instance, that's going to take a ramp up process. There are also a lot of, salespeople out there who are maybe good at selling themselves, but not necessarily selling, your agency's services. But if you're mandatory and you're like, I need to get out of doing all the day-to-day billables, hire a subject matter expert, which depending on what your agency focuses on, that could be a designer, it could be a developer, it could be copywriter, could be a generalist marketing coordinator. That's going to be unique to your agency, but get someone who's highly billable. And by the way, they're going to be billing, 30 hours a week. If you don't have the billables, that's going to be a stretch. But I'm going to assume if you're mandatory and you're totally overworked, it's because you have more work than you can do on your own. Now, what about, if you're necessary, right? You're able to get away sometimes, but you're kind of like the way one of my clients who owns an agency in Portugal, he's like, I understand there's going to be some firefighting. I just don't want to have to be putting out, a different fire, a different part of the barn on fire every single week, every single day, right? That in that case, he wasn't the client contact for most of his clients. He was necessary. So the idea of values, goals, and resources, if your agency doesn't know, here's a snag, if you don't know what your values are, you can't transmit those values to your team, right? Because you're not sure what they are. It's worth taking some time to identify what are your values. I usually approach that with clients around mission, vision, and values, MVV. It's good to have your mission and your vision down, but at least figure out your values. And sometimes I'll hear people say things like, "Well, we don't have agency values." Oh, you have values, you just haven't articulated them yet. A way to think about values, if you're defining them for the first time, is, what behaviors or activities of your agency are rewarded and what activities are punished. For instance, about a decade ago, I visited an agency, was having a meeting with one of their leaders, and it happened to be on, a Friday afternoon. And I walk out of the agency COO's office, and I noticed that 1/3 of the employees at like 6 or 7 p.m. on a Friday night are still at work, they're still at their desk, and they're working. That's a sign to me that at that agency, one of their values was face time. We expect you to be here, whether there's work or not. And it also seemed to be that there was some sort of a value probably about making overcommitments to clients. Like, why was everyone or, a third of the team still working when it was the weekend? Someone was probably, saying the client is always right. Oh, sure, we'll do that. Of course we'll do that. Oh, no, that's not extra, never mind, kind of thing. There are implications to choosing to operate your agency like that. I don't recommend it, but consider your values already exist, most of them. Now, you also might have some aspirational values, values you aspire to live by, things like that. But I would start by, if you want to make the leap from necessary to needed, you need to understand, what are your values? Also, what are the goals, at an agency level, client level, and so on. And then what are the resources? If you, I once started a job where I didn't have access to to an email account for 3 days. That made it somewhat hard to do my job because I couldn't log into anything because of all the password resets, blah, 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 to the email. Yeah. Yeah. So, if you're onboarding a new team member, make sure you get everything set up before day one. And then, going from needed to optional, as I wrote in my 2016 book, Made to Lead, which is a pocket guide to managing marketing and creative teams, it's easy to be a bad boss. It's really hard to be a good boss, right? If you just want to show up and not try very hard, you can be a bad boss. That's easy. But if you want to be a good boss, it's hard. I mean, I've invested. I mean, thinking between, the leadership retreat I mentioned in 2012, between working with my own coach. But by the way, if you're thinking of hiring a coach and they don't have their own coach, I think you should be skeptical, right? If well, wait a minute, if do you really believe in it? I actually have two coaches, and a therapist and a personal trainer and a financial planner. Like, we all need a support network, right? But I mean, I've invested a significant amount of
Sounds
budget.
significant.
What's that?
It sounds significant. You just listed all those experts. It's like, yeah, that's a team.
Yeah, and importantly, and time. Ultimately, in my work with one of my coaches, I mean, that's primarily been an hourly call every week since 2014. And that's a lot of time, right? I mean, imagine 52 weeks times 6. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
For instance, sometimes I do speaking, and I've helped clients do their own speaking for lead generation, and that's one of my books, The In-Demand Marketing Agency: How to Use Public Speaking to Become an Agency of Choice. And sometimes clients will say, or agency owners will say, I want to become a speaker, but like, I don't need to be great. Like, I don't know, I could be like a 6 out of 10 and that's fine. No,
What? That's ridiculous.
yeah, yeah.
That's a bar low. I want to hop right over it, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about
How was
speaking.
he? Well, he was a 6. Yeah.
I mean, that's a detractor on the Net Promoter Score
Yeah.
survey,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little hard to think about the idea of aspiring to, merely 6 out of 10, but also it's hard, right? To do, barely good enough job, I think. The other thing is that if you're enthusiastic about speaking, and if you don't want to speak, you don't have to speak. Like, I'm not saying you have to do it. There are other things, you can do marketing wise, but I don't know. I enjoy speaking. Once you get into it, like, it's fun. You're sharing. When I speak, I'm helping people. Basically all of my speaking is about helping agencies grow more profitably in different ways, dealing with difficult clients at your agency, how to figure out what is your ideal future so you can work backwards and get there faster, dealing with client onboarding, topics like that. I've had experiences and I've learned things myself and in working with hundreds of agencies that make life easier. And so it's almost like I can't not speak because I have some tips and advice and sharing, and plus even more in Q&A that can make life easier for thousands of people. Why would I not want to do that? I don't know if I don't think I'll ever see myself as a 10 out of 10 as a speaker. There's always room for growth. I'm involved in the National Speakers Association. I'll see other people who are speaking, way more than I am. And I get new ideas, like, always aspiring to get better. I don't know, if your goal is to be a 6 out of 10 as a speaker, that may not be the right direction for you.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And it sounds like, I guess the question here would be, how much of your coaching is on getting the owner just to focus?
I mean, that's a thread throughout. I'm unique as an agency coach and consultant in coming from an operations background, right? I've been a project manager, a director of client services, a director of operations, that kind of thing. And so for me, it's all about, how do we get results? How do we get things done? I'd mentioned my parents were both career Army officers. After they retired, they started a small rental property business and they put the kids to work. Because it turns out, at least in the US, if it is a family business, child labor laws do not apply.
Free labor. Love
So
it.
I was helping with, like tenant turnover, like cleaning and painting and getting supplies and this and that. Should I have been doing that in elementary school and middle school? Probably not. But, as my parents said, it built character. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So so the idea of, of getting results, that's always been a thing. I mean, I think for everyone listening, you have to understand, like, where are you now? Where do you want to go? Right. And that gives you a place to dig deeper. Is it follow-up questions on that?
Yeah, well, I think so. Like the speaking seems like a lot of agency owners are doing this now because a lot of them, there's kind of these companies that have come out with this template, which it's you write a book, we'll do the speaking part. They have this like model,
Yeah.
and they half-ass it, right? They're like, oh yeah, dude, I'll just be a six. Yeah,
Right.
taste doesn't matter to me. I'll eat something without salt, whatever. And and I see those things, and then I just wonder, is that just this looking at the competition, just wanting the sameness, like, all right, this is a status quo. You see where I'm going with that? Is that, and then they're like
Yeah.
shiny things. It's like somebody just did this. So yeah, that's where I wonder, like how much of that is like, dude, you or gal, you're in your own way. Like
Mhm.
literally just do your swim lane, and your swim lane is this.
Yeah. Um, in general, I'm reluctant to work with people who are always looking for, the shortcut, right?
Hmm.
I actually have a model for that. The idea of, do you lean more toward being an optimizer or a maximizer?
Hmm.
If you are a maximizer, your goal is grow, grow, grow at any cost, no matter the financial or stress or emotional or other cost, grow, grow, grow. An optimizer, on the other hand, is thinking about, yeah, I want to grow, but what's the return on investment?
Hmm.
Like, if I'm willing to work no more than 45 hours a week, how much do I want to grow?
Hmm.
In contrast, I heard from a maximizer, in fact, who inspired the article. Of course, I've met several maximizers over the years, who had said that his agency in Canada had doubled in size in terms of annualized revenue from 500,000 a year Canadian to 1 million a year equivalent in 4 months. How did he get there? Because he and his team were working 100 hours a week for 4 months.
Oh, geez, man, was you hanging out with your parents, slave driver?
And ultimately, and then he was surprised that employees were quitting. And I'm thinking, I'm surprised they lasted this long. And what he said, and this was, the reason he'd reached out to me was he was like, I want to grow from 1 million annualized to 5 million in revenue in 1 year.
That's gonna feel real good.
And he said, and he said, I also want really good employee morale and retention. And I said, those aren't going to go together. If you're going from 1 million to 5 million in a year, you're not a SaaS startup. And,
Hmm.
and I think that was part of the problem. He was comparing himself to Silicon Valley and elsewhere startups
Hmm.
where, yeah, you can grow that fast, but agencies are primarily services businesses. You're not going to scale that quickly. So I tried doing some probing to get a sense of the values he was operating by because, he said he wanted good morale. So it seemed like, maybe there's a solution that might work to optimize the factors. I said, what if his particular focus, by the way, is pay-per-click advertising. He had a particular lead gen source that was going to be very effective. So I knew he had the potential new business to support that. I said, what if you doubled or tripled? What if you went from 1 to 2 million or maybe 3 million in a year instead of 5? Right? There's a bit of sensitivity analysis about like, where's he going? And he said, 3 million would be okay. 2 million, I think I might get bored. Okay. And I said, 2 million is going to be doable from my work with agencies, like yours. 3 million is going to be tight, and it definitely won't have good team morale and retention. And this was when he revealed his true character. That's when he said, well, what if the retention for employees and morale, it's just good enough to get us to 3 million? I'm like, all right, I'm not going to work with him. Like he claims to care about his team and he doesn't. He just wants to take care of himself. And here's the thing. When you run a business and you run an agency in particular, I've written about the idea that you are the dictator of your agency. That is, as long as you're not telling people to do something illegal or unethical, they have to do what you say. But there's a catch. You bear the consequences of your actions, right? If you have people working 100 hours a week for 4 months, they're going to quit. And you don't get, you don't have your cake and eat it too. kind of thing. So you bear the consequences. Also, if you're running an agency, and most of my work is with digitally oriented agencies, your employees and your contractors have options. You're not running like a coal mine or a factory that is the only business in a small town, and people either work there or they don't have a job, kind of thing. People have options, especially amidst COVID, as agencies shift toward, an increasingly partially or fully remote model. People have options. If they have a bad experience at your agency, they're not going to stick around. Or if they stick around, it's because maybe they're not the best employee and they can't get a job somewhere else. So, that fits back into it's easy to be a bad boss. It's hard to be a good boss, but it's worth it. So, to the point about being, like just good enough. I think you have to decide. For some of the clients I've worked with, they conclude that they really don't like managing people. Like, I can help you improve as a manager if you want to improve. But sometimes with some clients, they'll conclude they don't like to manage people. And in that case, I'll help them transition toward a new business model. Because if you're an agency owner, you're running an independent agency, it's probably your primary financial asset, number one or number two, and you are managing people. Even if it means eventually maybe your optional is you've got a president running things day to day, you're still managing them. You're still probably managing a salesperson or salespeople. You're still managing at least one person, and they're going to escalate problems to you when they can't fix it themselves. You're a manager. If you do not like managing people, you shouldn't be running an agency. And in that case, it may make sense to transition to being, I think of it as a super consultant. You're charging very high prices. You might have someone as a project manager or an executive assistant supporting you. But basically you're doing everything. You're not managing people anymore. If you have one or two people on the team, they're sort of self-managed, or at least they're very proactive to an extent. They're managing you and your schedule, kind of thing. And then in that case, you're not managing a big team anymore. And in some cases, depending on how well your agency is running, you might be making more money as a super consultant on a net basis, or even if you aren't, you're a lot less stressed because you're no longer managing a team. But what's your reaction to that?
We just did my last interview was with a guy that built an agency over 2 million in revenue with over 20 employees, and then decided I don't want to manage people. So he literally went down to one employee, and then changed his business over into a passion project that he had, which is creating journals. Right.
Nice.
It was just our last interview. Great guy named Keith Roberts. But is it always organically found? Like, what would you say? How do you know if you hate managing people?
Well, I would take a look at what are the results you're getting. If your agency, if you're paying yourself market rate compensation, so that's over $100,000, the exact amount is going to depend on your size and some other factors. But okay, over 100 could be a couple hundred, few hundred, could be more. It kind of depends on your circumstances. If after all of the owners are getting market rate compensation, you're getting 20 to 30% net profit margins, you're probably managing well, right? That's my benchmark for ideal net profit margins. If you're below 20%, you've got profit leaks, and their management is probably part of the reason that that's the case, or challenges in management. I think you could also, ask a trusted member of your team, like on a scale of 0 to 10, how am I as a manager? Pay attention not just to their answer, but how they answer it, right? If they seem like they're being, like super cautious about, navigating that, that may be a sign that, you've scared your team a little bit too much. Yeah. You could also probably, if you're in a relationship, your life partner probably has an opinion on it too. Because they're overhearing you. Yeah.
Of course, honey, you are a terrible manager. I thought you knew.
I'm a fan of the Ask a Manager blog written by Allison Green at askamanager.org. And there was a question a while back where someone was like, someone wrote in and they were like, I'm concerned that my girlfriend is a terrible manager. Like I'll hear her like on the phone with employees and like, she sounds really mean. And it's like this different side of her that I've never seen myself. But like I'm worried, like, is this a problem? And they dug into it and it turned out, I think some of it was a concern. Other things was that she was just holding people accountable. And the person writing in apparently wasn't big into accountability, it seemed. So, I get some views. It's also worth considering. I mean, business is all about relationships. Thinking about on the, sort of the dating analogy is that if you're dating someone and you meet someone and, you're telling your friends about this person and maybe your friends are meeting them, COVID aside, and none of your friends likes the new person, what's the consistent theme here, right? These are people who know you well, probably have your interests at heart, and they're all concerned. I would pay attention to that. It's also worth considering, what are you doing for fun? I'm reading about leadership. I'm paying people to help me on leadership. I
It's
seek
like,
out
are you
feedback.
growing? Like,
Yeah,
are you trying to grow? Yeah.
after every event, I'll do a debrief. The
Mhm.
three questions of what worked, what didn't, what to do differently. Like my goal is to convey to my team that I'm always trying to get better.
Mhm.
If they suggested something and I did it, I'll make sure to let them know that I did it, right? Like my goal is to convey that it's a learning orientation, sort of the growth mindset rather than fixed mindset kind of
Mhm.
thing. Um, and if it's a situation where someone recommends something and it's not a fit for some reason, I'll explain, rather than just make people think like I didn't listen to them.
With your expertise based on somebody wanting to work less and make more, what is the smallest thing they can do that would generate the most impact across the board?
Hmm. I mean, everyone is different, right? Could you add in your hypothetical? Could you add a little more detail to what their situation might be? But thinking of like what you know from your members.
They're an agency owner and they want change. So, and that change would be, if we were to say, we could take any example. It could be this example, working
Yeah,
less to create more. But what
yeah.
is this? I could kind of broaden the question. Maybe you can even
Uh,
take this one off the board. What is the smallest thing you think agencies can do um, to get more out of their agencies? Like, what is that the smallest input that would generate the most?
The number one thing is to get clear on where you want to go. As Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. So the way I apply that with my clients is asking, where do you want to go? What does that look like 1 year from now? What does that look like 5 years from now? And I'll also go through an exercise, and I have a free article on this and even a free template on my website. I've developed a visioning tool that I call an advanced retrospective. The idea there is that, a retrospective is looking back. In this case, you're writing it in advance. Today is December 31st, such and such year. It's a great day because, and then you fill it in.
Hmm.
So you can do that for any time frame. With ongoing coaching clients, I'll recommend usually they do it for the year out, right? So, in November or December of 2020, it's about December 31st, 2021. But you can also do 5 years out if you have a milestone birthday coming up. Maybe you're turning 40 or 45 or 50, or you're turning 60, or whatever the case may be. Write about it as if it's already happened, and what's happening in your life. What decisions are you making? Who are the people you're working with? What does running your agency feel like? You also may conclude you aren't running your agency at that point in the future. And in a really extreme version, I've been writing advanced retrospectives for, at this point, a bit over a decade. Uh, I've actually started one where I'm writing when I'm like 90 years old, like looking back. You don't have to go that far in advance, but if you were to do just one thing to shift your agency, get clear on where you want to go. What are the benefits of doing that? Well, and check out the article on advanced retrospectives and the free template. But once you know where you want to go, you can work backwards from there. And importantly, you can enlist your team, right? If your team knows you're trying to accomplish certain things, they can help you do it. If your larger support network knows that you're trying to accomplish certain things, they can help you in that as well. But if no one knows where you want to go, they can't help you. And if you don't know where you want to go, um, you're not going to get there or wherever there is. And going back to my earlier point, if you are running an independent agency, and this is true for just about all of my clients, if you're running an independent agency, you are the owner and you are operating the agency, odds are your agency is your number one or number two financial asset, right? Like, what else in your life and in your financial portfolio is pumping out a six-figure annual salary and 20 to 30% net profit margins? And if you lean toward the equity side of things, is going to sell for, potentially a multi-million-dollar payday. Your agency is probably it. So I wouldn't leave it up to happy accidents. You can optimize your agency to make it better, to make it more profitable, to make it more stressful, to help you work less and earn more if you choose. It starts by getting clear on where you want to go. And then you can work backwards from there on how to make it happen and how to get others help to help you get there.
I love that. And a follow-up question to that is, we're talking about change, whether it's going from one stage to the next, swim lanes, goals, resources.
Yeah.
How often should teams meet? What does that internal communication look like from the leader to the team?
Some of that will depend on the agency size. If you're at a point where you're normally going to have everyone in a single meeting, and it's the point of like everyone's working on the same projects or retainers, you're probably going to have some sort of a weekly meeting reviewing what's coming up. You might have a daily stand-up. As you get bigger, if you're at 20 or 50 people or 100 people, you're probably going to have some sort of a monthly all hands. You could do quarterly, but I would probably, lean to doing some sort of an update more often than quarterly alone. You might have one or two annual retreats, and you could group that together, right? So you might be doing kind of a combo of things at once. That's the thing about meetings, right? You don't want to do too many meetings. You also don't want to do too few. Here's an example from a client. So the owner of the agency, they had about 15 people or so, had mentioned that he wasn't thrilled about sharing an update with the team on how things were going. And I'm like, well, for them, their salary from your agency is probably their primary source of income, right? They don't have other businesses they're running. Like they're really relying on the salary, twice a month or every 2 weeks or what have you. They want to know what's going on. And, the leadership team is having a lot of conversations about what's happening and what the plans are, and they understand why the agency has made certain decisions and what the direction is. If you're a frontline employee, you have no idea what's going on. You weren't in those meetings, right? And indeed, you don't have to be in every single meeting, but if your frontline employees want to know what's going on, they're relying on you. They're like, is the agency still going to be in business? Where is this going? Do I have a place in the agency's future? These are reasonable questions, and if you're smart, you're going to answer them. And you can do that proactively through whether it's monthly or quarterly all hands, and probably other communication in between. People can't read your mind. And so the coaching client had mentioned, it was like, well, do I really have to give them an update at the end of the quarter, at our next all hands in the month after that? I'm like, well, you don't have to, but again, they're relying on you. They need to know that the place they're working is doing okay. Or if it's not, like that there's a plan to fix things, right? I mean, this has been a challenging year for everyone. And he was like, all right, I guess so. He then got results back from the employee net promoter score, the employee NPS. And there was some constructive feedback. He asked if I could review it, right? It was like how likely are you to recommend working here, to someone else? And then there were comments. And as I reviewed the comments, I noticed something. 3 of the 15 employees said, if you're not on the management team, you don't really know what's going on. I feel like, I don't know what's going on. And these were generally employees who had given lower ratings on the NPS. And so I was able to, call that out to the owner and say, how we talked about how, I recommended giving the update and investing the time to do it. The survey results suggest that people aren't getting enough communication about this. So whether you want to do it or not, someone needs to tell them. Otherwise, they're going to fill in who knows what. Control the narrative, share the message. Don't create an information or leadership vacuum, because who knows what's going to happen. So, for anyone who's listening, if you're like, do I really need to tell people what's going on? Yeah, unless you want to put the future of your largest financial asset up to chance.
That is a great finish to that answer. So we've talked about, change, we've talked about leadership, we've talked about, somewhat, in culture. And I know we're coming up, in some of our time, and I want to give you some time to say a few other things. What is the best curriculum or the best place for people to seek information when it comes to trying to improve as a leader for their agency?
A few places, the Ask a Manager blog at askamanager.org is helpful. Mm-hmm. A lot of tactical examples, but there are, thousands of articles. You can probably find a solution to almost everything. Mm-hmm. Thinking more strategically, you could get my book, Made to Lead, a pocket guide to managing marketing and creative teams. It's a quick read. It's like 20, 30 minutes, lots of, snippets. I'd also recommend from Manager Tools at manager-tools.com. They have their book, The Effective Manager. It's a great overview of things to think about, how you operate as a manager. So I'd get the Effective Manager book as well. They also have training that you can do. If you don't want to read the book, but you'll go to, a day-long training, great. You can do that too. That's at manager-tools.com. Beyond that, if you don't have a therapist now, I'd recommend considering it. Odds are your insurance covers much or most of it, depending on the insurance plan, if you're based in the US. And then beyond that, I think it's going to be specific to each person. I would be open to feedback, right? One of my best bosses made a point of letting people know that if things weren't a match at the agency, she would help you find a new job. Mm-hmm. If you concluded, maybe you want to focus on a single client, right? Not the variety of clients. Like, people would tell her that, and she would help them find a new job, rather than like they were afraid to tell her, or like as soon as they mention it, they're fired, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so that made it safe for people to bring up concerns, rather than keeping it to themselves. There's the idea of if you see something, say something. The behavior you model on a daily basis is telling your team things beyond your exact words alone. So
actions.
Get
the therapist question. I want to ask a question on that.
Yeah.
How did you go about selecting a therapist? I've tried it. I've had some really interesting. I should write blog post about my therapist experiences. One therapist just talked about his mother the whole time, and then
not your mother, the therapist mother.
His dude, yeah. I was like, is this happening? I was like, all right, whatever. So like, yeah, that's not working.
Yeah.
And then the other guy, I didn't even go to talk, and I didn't say anything about my wife, but the whole time he's like trying to sell me. He's like, we should really do couples therapy. I was like, yeah. I didn't say anything about my wife though. Like,
okay. So he was doing an upsell to couples therapy without asking any. That wasn't a consultative sales process.
Yeah. So it was interesting. So after that, I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm gonna put pause on this. So I'd love to hear, like, how'd you go about it? Did you go like psychology.com? Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So, initially I started in college. So it was through the counseling center. And I ended up working with one person. It was like sort of so. I was like, is there someone else? They matched me up with someone else. They turned out to be a great match, and I kept kept working with him until I graduated. When I worked in New York, was living in New Jersey, commuting in, I ended up finding a nonprofit, sort of like therapy institute. So it was like training therapists, and then they also had therapy available to the public. They ended up matching me with someone. I worked with him for a couple of years, then it stopped when I moved to North Carolina, and then it was at a point of getting help again. In that case, I found someone who was at the opposite end of my office building, and continued working there even when I wasn't at the company anymore. And then more recently, my current therapist, who I've seen for about 2 years remotely. Right? So I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. She's in Boulder, Colorado. I actually did meet up once in person. I had a talk in Denver, and so I went up to Boulder and did an in-person session with her. But I met her through my coach. Had recommended her, and she's been great. I think it's worth considering that as with any kind of ongoing relationship with someone, like things need to click. If you're looking for therapists, like you need to feel understood. They need to focus on you, not their own parents, kind of thing. And you know what? I would say, what is their intake process like? When I'm working with a client, even before we decide to work together, I've got a 9 or 10 question pre-intake questionnaire to sort out, like, where have they been? How are things going? Where do they want to go? What are their expectations, right? I mean, my goal is to understand, am I a match or not? And if I'm not, I'll call that out. Sometimes even not doing an exploratory call if it's clear things aren't a fit. So like, is the therapist trying to get to know you?
Mm-hmm.
Are they making you feel heard? Are they acknowledging and validating your concerns and and your feelings? And also, does it seem like they've got a process to help you move forward? I've done, as I said, 20 years on and off of therapy. And usually it's been sort of focused on particular things. You don't have to go forever. And you also don't have to go, necessarily once a week. Although if you haven't been before, it may help to go somewhat more often to dive in. But you may find that it's your favorite hour or 50 minutes, depending on their model, of the week, because you get to make it all about you, right? In our work, we're helping our clients, we're helping our team. And I talk about, think about the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, and StoryBrand has certainly, adopted that. If you think about the hero's journey, we're the hero of our own lives. But if you can make the client the hero of their lives, and you're the helper making life easier for them, that's great. But I think we all need someone where, we're the hero and, they're helping us improve in whatever we're doing. That's what a good therapist can do. Now, if you're totally starting from scratch, two places to look. One, therapy is cheaper if you're going in-network. So, I would suggest looking at the in-network side of things first. Your health insurance company is going to have a website where you can find providers. You can see who's near me, who's in-network for your particular plan. I would probably start there, because in that case, you're probably paying maybe a specialist or primary care copay or something like that, rather than having to pay cash. So that's a potential place to look. You can also look at Psychology Today, which is a therapist matching service, right? It's sort of a lead gen oriented thing. You can get info on different people. And don't be afraid to shop around, right? Like, do an initial session. You'll probably need to pay for the initial session. If, by the way, you're like, why should I pay? Well, I don't know. I mean, think about how do you feel about working with a prospective client who expects, free advice and
Right.
doesn't want to pay for it, right? I mean, like, at a minimum, they have a master's, they may have a doctorate in this. They are a professional. So maybe you pay $100 for the first session or something like that. How do you feel after the first session? Do you feel like this has potential? I would recommend doing a few sessions, maybe 3. Does it feel like you're getting what you need? And getting what you need may include some uncomfortable things, right? If they may be pointing out some negative patterns in your choices. So it's not all about like kind of warm and fuzzy and feeling great about everything, but does it seem like it's going in the good direction? So I'd say start with your in-network list through your health insurance. and or check out Psychology Today. And that'll also help you sort out, are they taking new patients? A lot of therapists, I mean, especially with COVID, are maxed out. So you want to make sure they're open. Do an intake, maybe do a couple with different people, do a few sessions, decide from there.
Cool. I love it. All right. Couple last questions, if that's okay. I know we're
Yeah,
summing up.
absolutely.
One, what should somebody do now to take action on working less to make more?
Well, I would start by identifying which stage you're in out of those 4 stages, right? Stage 1 is mandatory, stage 2 is necessary, stage 3 is needed, not necessary, and stage 4 is optional. So I would start by understanding which stage are you in now. We talked a bit about different bits in that earlier. How mandatory or not or optional are you on a day-to-day basis? Then identify, where do you want to go? You're going to move up one step at a time, right? You're not going to suddenly go from mandatory to optional overnight. Or if you think you do, you will be sorely disappointed. So identify where you are now, where you want to go, and then take the first step to start getting there, right? If you're mandatory, start defining your swim lanes. If you are necessary, look at the values, goals, and resources, make sure everyone on your team knows them, everyone's on the same page. And if you're needed and you want to become optional, work on improving your skills in hiring and in coaching your team, including whether it's Made to Lead, my book, whether it's reading askamanager.org, whether it's reading the Manager Tools, the Effective Manager book. We can always get better. Certainly consider hiring a coach if you want to get there faster, but I would start with the free or low cost resources first, because those are going to make a big difference fast. And if you choose to apply the advice.
Perfect. And then, is there anything that I didn't cover that the world should know? Are you promoting anything that you would like to share? This is your space.
Oh, well, I have hundreds of free articles about agency management at my website at sakasandcompany.com. That's SAKASAND, the word company.com. I'd recommend signing up for my email newsletter. It's an email that several agency owners have said is one of the only emails they open every time. And in an extreme case, an agency owner in Brazil posted on LinkedIn that whenever he gets an email from me, he's not a client. Whenever he gets an email from me, he stops whatever he's doing, he gathers his business partners, and they debrief on how to apply that to their agency.
And I've seen that comment. I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that was nice to see. The emails do go out every Wednesday and Saturday. So, you could always schedule time on Thursday and on Monday if you wanted to, pre-schedule the time. But yeah, go to sakasandcompany.com, check out the email newsletter. And if you're interested in a bit more support, I do executive coaching, I do strategy projects, both agency roadmap and custom consulting. Can also do one-off calls if you're looking for kind of a sounding board sort of situation, a bite-sized call. I'm also doing something new that actually ties into work less, earn more, right? Where, we know the stages, we know generally where to focus, but how do we create a specific plan to get there? And I have something new that'll help people do that. It's an agency growth boot camp based on the work less, earn more model, based on the framework. And that'll be launching in early 2021, or it'll run early 2021. If you go to sakasandcompany.com/bootcamp, you can hear more about that. It's application only, so not everyone is going to be a fit. You need at least 5 team members on your team now. That is, you have people you can delegate to that are available to help. And ultimately, by the end of these 6 weeks, they're going to be live group coaching and training, and it's recorded if you miss a session. You'll have the beginning of a plan to help you grow in 2021, ideally while working less and or earning more. So that's at sakasandcompany.com/bootcamp.
Okay, so Karl, if there's one place that our audience could look to improve as a leader, where would that be? Or a curriculum or anything to that nature?
Yeah. Well, a few possibilities. You could get my Made to Lead book on managing marketing creative teams. You could visit the askamanager.org website for ideas on ways to level up. You can also get the Manager Tools book, The Effective Manager. Those are all good potential places to start. You can certainly dig deeper from there. Those will give you some frameworks to make better decisions. That's where I'd start.
Okay, fantastic. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I've got tons of free advice on my website, sakasacompany.com. There are about 400 articles. There's a free newsletter that people have shared has been very helpful in managing their agency. If you'd like further help one-on-one, glad to talk about that. And check out the Agency Growth Bootcamp at sakasacompany.com/bootcamp to jumpstart your coming year.
Perfect. Karl, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John.